The ego is the system that runs your sense of self. It is made out of thought patterns, emotions, and behavior loops, and the stories that try to hold it all together. Left unchecked, it creates endless existential searching, chronic disconnection, and the persistent sense that something is wrong. The goal of my videos is clarity, to see your identity and its contradictions for what they are, named precisely, to finally understand what it is that we're all running away from. This topic is dangerous. And in a way, all of the topics that I cover are somewhat dangerous for the psyche, but this topic touches something very foundational about everyone's epistemology. Epistemology is how you can know something, and even further I would go towards ontology, which is the nature of being, like what does it mean for something to be. When I had my third God realization, stop right there, what does God realization even mean, right? Like, I could tell you the experience that I had, but in the back of your mind, you might ask, okay, but does this mean this is true? Does it mean this is real? And before I go into the realness of the thing, I would like to just talk in terms of phenomenology. Like, how was it like to experience something that you could call a God realization? If the experience or what this experience is trying to point towards is real or not, we can talk about later in this video. But the first time I had a God realization, the experience was that my entire life I've been running away from putting myself on the level of God. And this really starts in my youth, where first I didn't believe in God at all. And this meant that I was pretty much just in my own little childhood bubble, and I didn't really know how to relate to existence. And then through my parents, we went to church, and my parents themselves found God in that time, and it actually pretty much saved their relationship and saved the family in a way. And from there, I became Christian, and I also cried in church. Like, I had a very strong relationship with God when I was a kid. And then I became older and I started to question the religion, and I started to question Christianity, started to question the Bible. And when I tried to question the Bible, then it became very clear that this is not something you're supposed to question. You're just supposed to accept it. And I didn't like that. And I had questions about the dinosaurs, Adam and Eve, evolution. And the older I got, the less sense everything makes, and the more I could see everybody rationalizing things that make zero sense, especially in terms of morality and all of the evil that is allowed for. So then I became very atheist. And when I became very atheist, I had a lot of fun watching like Matt Dillahunty and all of these videos like dunking on Christians. This was very satisfying for me because I finally got validated by with all my rationality. And I think like one hurdle that I had was just this idea of hell. Like, what if I go to hell just by doing all of this stuff? Or like by being so mean towards God. And I think it's something every Christian would like look at in terror, but I said like some sort of vulgar insult towards God once in my sleep, just so that I could make sure that I I really do not believe in God, and I can like play with going to hell, right? Like saying something that would would never be forgotten. I actually have forgotten what I said. It probably wasn't even that big of a deal. I was just very young. And from there, I then, really rejected God, like wholeheartedly. I really thought it was all very silly, especially when I then saw people being grateful for God because God helped them found the parking spot or helped them found the car keys. It's like, doesn't God have anything better to do? Are you that special? And I could be quite mean with that sometimes, but then over time I learned to kind of accept that everybody has their own like view of this stuff. So I do think that this context is important so that you understand my relationship with that word. And then over time, when I got more and more into philosophy, this idea of God transformed into something more abstract, where I started to understand, okay, if you take it like just literally, the idea of a power that is omniscient, all-knowing, and all-powerful and all-loving, then I could actually grasp onto something like, okay, what does these things mean? Like, how could that exist? And there are a ton of arguments against it, right? Like, How can something be all loving if there's a huge amount of suffering created through God's creation? How could it be all knowing? Like, it's not it's impossible to know everything at the same time. Like, me as a human has such a limited view of knowledge. Now, how could a God know everything? Like, it made, from a pure scientific standpoint or like an understanding of physics standpoint, 0%. Being all powerful is also kind of like, okay, yeah, how could God create a stone that he cannot lift himself? These classical arguments, they seemed foolproof for the fact that God doesn't exist. Now, all of this like rationality got stripped away at once when I had my God realization. Because in the moment of God realization, I wasn't on substances, by the way. Like, this happened like in a phase where I was taking LSD and stuff, but it wasn't doing that. But all at once, it all crashed into the sense of, wait a minute, what I experience as I fits the definition of God exactly the moment my feeling of ego-ness, like my feeling of selfhood that is limited, drops away. Because my conscious experience actually qualifies as an omniscient, all-powerful thing. I wasn't sure about the loving part yet, but it made complete sense all at once, because if consciousness is what God is, then we have a force in the universe that seems to be made out of what reality is, and at the same time has all the power, because reality creates all the power through consciousness, and then also is kind of all knowing, because whatever consciousness experiences itself as is what it knows itself to be. And if consciousness is foundational and physics is like, or like reality is like a field through which consciousness exists in, then it knows all possible state spaces of existence at once, because it knows all like every little atom, every little physical configuration. It goes into the direction of panpsychism, for sure, like believing that consciousness is fundamental. But independent of if you believe this is true or not, the experience felt like, oh my God, this is absolutely obvious. And my entire life, I've been running away from that, because immediately when I saw this, I had so many defense mechanisms come up, and I could feel it in my body. Like, what will people think of me? I must be going insane. If I say that I is equivalent to God, like, what is going to happen? Am I going to get crucified? Am I going to get stoned to death for this, incredible level of, what's the word? Am I going to get crucified for this incredible level of blasphemy? And then also, okay, what will others think of me? There's no way I could make the argument to anybody with a rational mind that this makes sense. At least at this point in time, non-duality wasn't that popular. I didn't really know that much about it. I feel like nowadays, also I have a channel where I talk about this stuff all the time, so it feels way more acceptable. But this was probably in 2000, either 20 or 19 or 21. I'm actually unsure right now about my own timeline. I think it was just after COVID. So from there, I felt like I must be going insane, because this is what people this must be what people call a God complex. Like, there's no way that this makes sense. And as much as I was starting to fight this realization, the more it became obvious that this is what's true. Because I'm fighting a mountain of cultural and societal and psychological baggage of, and I am believing in God again. This cannot, I cannot accept that. The implications philosophically, spiritually, epistemologically, they were so big, and I felt like I was going insane. But while this was happening, my sense of consciousness or awareness was just it's as if I'm a balloon that is now getting bloated up, and I could sense all the data in my environment 10 times more intensely. So as much as I wanted to argue against this philosophically, these arguments, they didn't even have space to take root in. I can tell you all of these arguments now, but in this moment in time, I wasn't actually mentally arguing against that realization. It was just an understanding of all the friction that I have built up to onto this point of my life for this realization to happen, and how there's like this huge unconscious or subconscious well of ideas that just makes perfect sense for why this is true and why I don't want this to be true. And this was pretty much a shifting point, because then these feelings or like these philosophical ideas of open individualism, like everything being one, or you being another being's consciousness, or death not being the end, all of these ideas started to make sense, and they became part of like some grounding epistemological framework. I also felt like I could never I had to take this realization to the grave. Like, it's an insight that I have now that I cannot talk with anybody about. Everybody will think that I'm insane. Nobody will take me seriously. And I am going to be forever alone by having seen this, because, this is just too much to see. There was so much cultural baggage around that, also in the way of like, okay, this, I cannot really tell this to people. So from there, I looked deeper into non-duality. I looked deeper, like the timelines are a bit mushy, I must admit. But I looked deeper into non-duality. I looked deeper into open individualism. And over time, I noticed too that this idea of God realization, if you look at it online and inform yourself about it, there's this weird thing where the ego basically starts to grab onto the word of God. And then this insight, oh, I understand now, everything is God, or the universe is God, or existence is God, then in of itself becomes a new identification, a new way to label consciousness and label reality. And then it becomes a new ego identity in a very abstract way. It's like the identity of no identity. And this also happens with people who maybe feel too uncomfortable to use the word God, but then just say consciousness or the universe, because it has like less of this cultural baggage behind it. And then saying, oh, everything is consciousness, or I am the universe, feels like an expansion that feels like, oh, this is the final level of it all. But what is really going on is that the ego still found a new way to identify with existence and to give itself a role that is pretty much, grandiose. Because on one layer, yes, you are kind of all of the universe. If you see the interconnected oneness just with physics, right? We don't need to use these very religious terms. Just physics shows that atoms interconnect with each other. They communicate. Physics is a field. Like, the interconnectivity of everything shouldn't be like a spiritual question. It is pretty much embedded in also our scientific understanding of things. It's just that this consciousness question is what keeps us up at night. So the interconnectivity of everything kind of makes it so that you can call that whatever you want, but the relationship that you have to that interconnectivity is where the ego then comes into play. The feeling that you are God personally and have created the entire universe becomes a narrative. And I also have seen this with my clients and people who are seeking enlightenment. And there's also like a lot of guilt that then come up, where you think, okay, I am responsible for the pain of this world because I am the one who has literally created it. And then it becomes kind of dark, because the ego then spins out narratives that rarefies God into a thing with itself. And here's where the mistake happens. And that's also why I am God is pretty much, it instinctively feels delusional, because what you hear when you hear you hear ego, which makes sense, right? Because this is how we refer to each other. So if God exists, then it would be like the ultimate level of selflessness, making all of the universe and all of the multiverse exist without any personal stakes, and just say, go, and then just experience everything that is possible. But then there's no one singular I there. There's no ego there. Or it's also like the ultimate selfless act, because you're just doing it for, existence as a whole. Saying that I am God creates this sort of dynamic where the ego inserts itself into the conversation and makes it about itself. And it's almost impossible to kind of avoid the moment you say the sentence, and that's why it feels so it feels icky to say. And I would say that the God realization is also just one stage of deeper existential realization. And if you move all the way, then this God realization also kind of drops. Like this experience of being one with God is also kind of a fantasy of the mind trying to grasp something that is just way too infinite for itself to understand. And I had a few of these experiences on psychedelics that were also just so immense in their power, and also full of awe and beauty, right? Like the moment the ego drops away, like if you have a genuine realization that is not fueled by this ego intersection, and your ego drops away, and from there you have like, oh wow, I am one with God, then there's an immense beauty in that. And it is also part of all religion. Like it is not that crazy if you put it into like the context of a church, the context of somebody praying or having an encounter with Jesus. Like that's the same experience really, just that religions always tell you, okay, but don't put yourself as one with it, but always make the separation. Like don't eat the apple. You are not the same. And in a way it tries to kind of like temper or like put the ego into its own little box so it doesn't get too grandiose. But the idea that we are one with God is actually found in all religions. It's not that odd. It's just that all religions kind of phrase it more carefully, and some really don't like if you go there whatsoever. The experience that I had when I had these very intense psychedelic realizations were fueled with so much joy and bliss. There was such a level of beauty in these realizations, also outside of psychedelics, right? Like even the first time I saw this, it was very, very awe-inspiring and beautiful, to the extent that reinforced the belief that I'm going crazy. I must be going crazy now. Like there's no way that this isn't some sort of God complex. But the distinction between a genuine insight and a God complex is if your ego is dissolving, and then through the dissolution you experience this beauty and this awe, and the mind pretty much drops away, and you still might have like this intuitive understanding of, okay, this is probably what they mean with being one with God. Or the ego kind of fights for its life, or not even fighting for its life, but it asserts itself as like an anchor in the experience, and then really feels the I-ness of it. And it's not about, you don't need to reject this, like it's not about, oh, I shouldn't do this, but within the experience it becomes kind of obvious that there's a self-aggrandizement there. And the self-aggrandizement is also somewhat, I wouldn't say important, but it's kind of natural, because you're confronting something that is so infinite, and you're so finite and so small, that you pretty much move from the extreme of, oh, I am nothing, to I am everything. And it is so mind-blowing that the only way to kind of hold yourself together is to put a center into the experience and say, the center is I am in the center of infinity, or I am God. And you could just have this entire experience and just move the God part away and just experience it purely. But that's, not what most people have the first time they encounter this, because it's just so overwhelming. If I talk to somebody that needs help because they are very much ungrounded, and they are kind of suffering a lot from all of their existential insights, then oftentimes this sense that God is real, it gets pretty much confused with their own ego. And then there's like an internal split with their sense of self that is being harmed by a bad life or bad life circumstances. And then there's this weird thing happening where people feel like that God is real and God exists and is outside of them and is causing them to suffer. And at the same time, they feel like they are God, but they are not God here now, but in some sort of other dimension, and are now punishing themselves in this finite human dimension for whatever. And this is a very, very ugly situation to be in, because it feels very solipsistic. Like it feels like, okay, I am the only being in existence and I'm causing myself to suffer. That's like the only logical explanation. And people get into a spiral there where they never really connect with other people anymore, because Yeah, it's solipsism basically, because they see all other human beings either as not existing at all, like they're not real. In the infinite cosmos, there only exists one God, and it basically tricks itself with other people to believe that there are differences so that, that it can interact and be with somebody. And this can be, yeah, quite paralyzing for a lot. But the delusional aspect here is then to believe that other beings are not real, that other conscious experiences don't exist just because you don't have direct access to them from your own viewpoint. And really, the only way to often come out of these kind of delusional narratives that the mind has is to, again, go to the scientific route and deconstruct the existence of God altogether. Because it does not exist how many egos imagine it to be, as like a being with a finite self. like a lot of the way people try to come around this concept of God is to personalize it, right? It helps a lot to see God as not God but Jesus, for example. Now it becomes a person, and it has a bit more relatability to it, as weird as it sounds. And it also gives this ego the sense of separation, that they don't need to be one with it, because that's maybe too overwhelming, and then you can just have like another like split with also, yeah, some God that is external to you, or Jesus Christ or whatever, and from there have this like healthy relationship where you still can keep somewhat of a distance. And hey, this is for many people a very good way to relate to all of this stuff and to live, because it doesn't force the ego to dissolve into all of this madness, you might say, or at least temporary madness. So I would say that a lot of religious beliefs are almost like a scaffolding that protect people from this overwhelming feeling of being one with all sins of humanity, or being one with all the suffering of humanity, or being, yeah, eternal and never dying. Like there's so many ontological or epistemological fractures that can happen within the mind once you see yourself or believe yourself to be one with God. That is very destabilizing. And for an atheist, like somebody that completely rejects the notion of God altogether, this doesn't compute. They might then just replace the word God with the universe, and honestly, this is completely fine, right? I just would really push on the idea why the word God is the right word, and it's because through all religions, people have talked about a being that is all powerful, omniscient, and all loving. And it is a being, it is not that matter. And if you look at your own life and your own experience, everything is alive. There's actually nothing that is kind of purely dead matter. And if you say, no, what are you talking about? Like, my phone isn't alive, like, the wall isn't alive, what are you talking about? Well, the only way you can perceive any object in physical 3D space is because you are a live rendering engine of a world that exists. And the world that exists created you. So even if you want to say, no, atoms aren't alive, well, they are creating life all the time. They are not separate from the interconnectivity that creates life everywhere. So the distinction that you're trying to draw is kind of arbitrary. And also, if you look deeper into how atoms function, how bacteria functions, how chemics function, how your entire body is like, instead of one life form, more like one, yeah, in an incredible amount of different cells communicating with each other and making you be alive. There's so much intelligence flowing everywhere that just dismiss it all and say, no, it's all cold, dead physics. And somehow the brain then creates consciousness. It is very intellectually dishonest. And there I think you can have some interesting debates where you can rationalize towards God in a way that is actually, yeah, truthful. At least you can use the word. But I try to avoid it. Like, I do this sometimes in these videos. But I prefer, the moment I talk on this level, I prefer to, yeah, use my Substack or the community that I'm currently building, which, yeah, only people who subscribe to my Substack will get first access to. The fear that comes with this sort of realization is also not to be underestimated. because it is not just this like, oh yeah, boom, I see it all, it's the truth. No, it's more like, oh god, I'm so scared, please, what is going on? That's more like the flavor of it, because depending on how much you're forced into this realization and how much you are slowly deconstructing your mind into this realization, is pretty much how fast do you have to move towards fear and how much fear do you have to endure at the same time. Fear is actually something that I want to talk about way more because, yeah, although I very much don't experience it anymore, except on like very high doses, on not even very high doses, but on higher dosages of psychedelics, or if I were to like go to on a meditation retreat, I assume there would be some fear. But fear is actually a huge part of this entire process, and why this idea is so viscerally rejectable, because it confronts you with so much existential fear. The implications of for the mind, what this means, forces like an ego dissolution that, yeah, pushes you through a ton of fear. And the fear is what the ego tries to resist and contracts itself into. And if it contracts itself into this amount of fear, then it solidifies the fear into like almost like this ball of suffering. And I don't want to scare you, but the amount of psychological terror that can be experienced is so much higher than you can fathom. And it also kind of relates again to this idea of being one with God, because you have the capacity for infinite amount of suffering and infinite amount of bliss, and it's a logarithmic scale. This means that it doesn't go linearly up, it just goes and it doesn't end. Like, it can go endless, and this is true for all sorts of emotional experiences. And if you had like a traumatic psychedelic experiences, you know what I'm talking about. And even if you had the very blissful experience where you just experience so much love and beauty. By the way, I need to talk about love. So much beauty that the sense is that, oh wow, if I can, as a human being, experience an intensity that feels proportionate to the entire universe, because this is how it feels like. It feels like your entire conscious field in your own brain feels as intense as if you're experiencing entire universes at once in the same time. And if you haven't had these experiences, this might absolutely sound insane to you. And you don't have to have these experiences either, right? That's not something that you need to do. You can have a ton of existential freedom and realization without all of this framing that I'm giving you right now. It's really about moving through your own layers of fear until you like feel kind of okay. The deeper you go into it, the deeper you'll find layers of fear that you didn't know was there. And it doesn't need to go that exponential. The exponentiality is really more like an ego feeding loop that is just scared of the fear and then scared of the fear, and then it just multiplies itself. It's also where the idea comes from that pain and suffering isn't the same, because suffering is the multiplication of the pain that the mind then anticipates, and this anticipation makes everything worse. So love in this entire conversation is something that I so far I think I've avoided a little bit, because the question then of course becomes, okay, so you have the omnipotent part, like being able to do everything, like being all powerful, and consciousness, or like existence, we can just call it existence, is all powerful, right? Because it is what exists, it's all that could be. Then the omniscient part is like, we go into like weird panpsychist territory if you believe consciousness is fundamental, and you might want to argue that. And then the third part is the all-loving part, which is that what Christians always said, right? God is all-loving. And from like the atheistic standpoint, it's very obviously not the case, because if it was all-loving, why would it cause so much harm? But if you really introspect a little bit here, then why are people then having children, right? Like, you know that if you have a child, it's going to suffer, and you know it's going to experience a lot of pain. So you might say that having children is not a loving act. And everybody who is a parent knows that this is completely, like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, you experience an immense amount of love for the creation and an immense amount of responsibility for that creation, but it doesn't mean that you want to protect it from all suffering. So there's like a maturity in realizing that, pain and suffering to a large extent is a part of life. And if you want to have anything at all, then you must have that. And then on the highest level, if you imagine a God that is truly selfless and unconditionally loving, then why would it stop at pain? this is a very, almost naive way of looking at the world. And I'm talking from experience, right? This is like, I'm brushing this aside because a lot of my videos talk about this. But yeah, if you're going to have any sort of duality or any sort of experience with conflict, any sort of being that isn't just nothing, then pain is pretty much part of the course. And it's the resistance to that that makes everything horrible. And the acceptance of everything, the I want something to be, I want something to exist, I want something to emerge, I want to connect with it, I want to be it, is love. And that's how love can be a foundational aspect of the universe and not some emotional human thing. Because if love is interconnectivity, then okay, the relation between all physics, all humans, all beings, all art is love. And the only thing in the way of that is the ego, arguing with suffering, arguing with pain, arguing with how one's life isn't as good as it should be, arguing with the people around you, arguing for why you aren't powerful enough or don't have enough money, or why you are sick, chronically sick. There are a lot of good reasons why you might resent existence, but the moment it becomes existential and you like kind of fault God for it, you again create this duality split with something that doesn't have that because it's selfless, and you're creating a self that then fights against it. So unconditional love must accept everything how it is, and if you introspect about the nature of consciousness, that's what it does. Because by verifying reality, by experiencing something for just how it is like I haven't showed this cup in a while, so by just experiencing what it is, just for how it is, then there's nothing that can possibly dislike it except another perspective. So you as a human mind will have like a ton of associations with a cup like this, and like think about a ton of stuff and then filter your reality perception according to like your viewpoint, and then you have like good associations or bad associations, and then dislike or like it. But the qualia of seeing and perceiving, even if you have a ton of narratives in your head about it, like they are all accepted because they are all there. So the cup is as much there as your perception about it, as your thoughts about it, as your narratives about it, and all of it is accepted in the sense that it is real, and in the sense that you are this entire process of perception. Like there's no limitation between anything. There cannot be. This is why reality is real. This is why reality is loving. This is why, if God exists, he is unconditionally loving, and why all of the arguments happen in your head, and why suffering just seems so counterintuitive for the ego as be something to be accepted, which is it is acceptance that moves you towards the God realization, which moves you towards unconditional love for all things, which is the entire spiritual journey summed up. And that's why this God realization stage is very common and kind of normal. I wouldn't go as far as to say you must have had an experience like this in order for you to be awakened or whatever, because there are like a lot of different flavors of humans and a lot of different psyches. So your journey might differ. I can only say how it is like for me. But if you want to take a look at your own journey, at your own perception, and where your resistance still lies, and you don't really know how to orient yourself, then check out my ego architecture audit in the link in the description, where I analyze egos and find out where are the exact knots that keep people stuck in their own reality model that feels still full of discomfort or fear, or you want to be grounded because you have had a realization. It doesn't need to be a God realization that makes you feel confused about the nature of your own existence. Then I can help you with that directly via a one-on-one protocol.